Ask Chuck.
This is Randall V. from Leiden, the Netherlands, and he writes, with the recent developments between President Trump and Vladimir Putin, another meeting with no real results, but clear advantages for Putin, I left deeply frustrated. How is it possible that wealthy democracies like the US and EU keep allowing him to get what he wants time and again with so little pushback? As someone from Leiden, the city the Pilgrims once left in search of liberty, I feel a deep historical connection to the United States. But it's hard to reconcile that legacy with today's seeming powerlessness in the face of authoritarianism, authoritarian aggression. Have we reached the limits of democracy, or are we simply too divided and distracted to act? Warm regards, Randall. You know, I've thought about this question in a few ways because it actually applies to, and I know you're going to find this at first odd, but it sort of applies to why folks aren't taking this measles outbreak more seriously, for instance. And you know, I'm glad to see that the Texans feel like they're finally getting this under control. You know, there's a point where, you know, the whole point of history is you know, if you don't learn it, you're deemed to repeat it. But it turns out we forget it in civilizations time and time again. And it feels like about, you know, once something fades into third or fourth generation, it's almost like we have to repeat it. Because I can tell you with what we're going through, one of the reasons, and you've heard me say this, why I'm long-term optimistic but short-term pessimistic about sort of where this democracy is going, is that we've done this. We do this. We've done it a few times where we have veered into some undemocratic, you know, lanes here, and then all of a sudden we correct ourselves. It's like we're about to swerve off the road, and we somehow, just before we go into the ditch, we get back on the straight and narrow. So there's a part of me that wonders if just Hitler's too far away. What happened in Europe is too far away. You know, my grandfather who fought has been dead for 45 years, right? So here was a first person account that I'm no longer getting, right? Which means my kids are getting secondhand, third hand. So maybe it's that. I'm not, you know, I'm just throwing that idea out there that sometimes we have to, you know, there's an expression in this country, the second, you know, there's no new intelligence is learned from a second kick into the head from a mule, meaning, you know, once you've learned the way mules kick, you're going to sort of stay out of their way. I don't know about that. Sometimes I think our country needs a kick in the head about every 80 years, where we'll go through an existential crisis or two, you know, where we were in the 1850s and where we were in the 1930s. And that was more global than just here. And then here we are again, arguably, right? You know, now we're just under 100 years later, about 80, you know, somewhere between 80 and 90 years later. So it may simply be that as John McCain used to joke, it's always darker, you know, he used to quote Mao saying it's always darkest before it turns really black. But I do think that some of this is just is some sort of, it's not that we forget what happened. We just can't imagine that our modern society, we would allow the same things to happen that happened in the 30s. And yet now we're all finding out, oh, this is how Germany might have happened, right? So I'm surprised you're not more optimistic about Europe's response. I've been impressed with how united Europe has stuck with Ukraine. And in some ways, I think it may be in the long term better for the EU, better for the continent as a whole, that that there was the possibility that the United States wouldn't be the chief ally anymore for one reason or the other. I'd like to think that will still never happen. But the fact that you know, you see everybody in Europe pivoting to collective security, I think it gives me some hope that, hey, there are, you know, it obviously the closer the war is to you, the more serious you take the threat. This war's on the other side of an ocean for us, and then on the other side of a continent there, right? It is not for you. So perhaps we should take the fact that Europeans seem to be a bit more united, have been, look, I was extraordinarily impressed with how Europe's responded to Trump 2.0. And I think that maybe that's, you might feel a bit more optimistic if you focus on how's Europe responded. I mean, look, trust me, I don't like that the United States is not interested in being leader of the free world. I did not know we'd ever have an American president that didn't want to be leader of the free world, that didn't want to be the chief promoter of liberty and democracy around the world. That's a big change for a lot of us. Many of us hope it's temporary.